There are moments in human history that shine with clarity, moments we can trace through tools, bones, and fragments of art. But between those fragments are long stretches of silence, great gaps where the story of our species becomes blurred and uncertain. Tonight we step into one of those silences, a time so vast and so mysterious that even the best science struggles to explain it. A time when humanity existed, survived, and endured, yet left behind almost nothing to tell us who they truly were. This is the prehistoric time gap. Imagine yourself drifting backwards through time, past the familiar pages of recorded history, past the first cities, past agriculture, past even the moment when humans began painting on cave walls. We travel further still, until the ground beneath us is not stone and mortar, but soil and ash. The horizon is endless. Mammoths graze in the distance. Giant cats prowl through the shadows. The air is heavy with the raw scent of earth and rain. This is the world as it was nearly 1 million years ago. And here, scattered across the plains, are the ancestors of humankind. They walk in small groups carrying simple tools of stone and wood. Their lives are harsh, their nights filled with the cries of predators. And yet, behind their heavy brows and sharp gazes, there is something waiting to emerge, something beyond survival, the spark of imagination, the seed of story. But the puzzle is this. For hundreds of thousands of years, that spark flickered quietly, leaving behind almost no trace. Then, seemingly overnight in the grand sweep of history, it burst into a fire of creativity. Caves filled with paintings, stones carved into symbols, music and ritual, art and memory. It was as if humanity had suddenly woken from a long sleep. The question is, why? Archaeologists call this the cultural Big Bang, the sudden surge in human creativity that happened around 40,000 years ago. But when we look at the evidence, we find hints of culture much, much earlier. We find skulls that suggest advanced thought nearly 1 million years ago. We find tools that seem out of place, burials that suggest belief, and artifacts that whisper of minds more complex than we once imagined. It is as though the story of humanity was not a steady climb, but a jagged path, full of rises and falls, awakenings and silences. And this silence, this prehistoric time gap, may be the most mysterious of them all. Perhaps the gap was not a void at all, but a chapter erased by time. Some scientists suggest that the art and culture of these early humans were created in fragile forms: wood, sand, song, things that could never survive the ages. Others argue that climate shifts and catastrophic events nearly wiped out our species, leaving only fragments of memory to be carried forward. Whatever the reason, the record is broken. The story is incomplete. Picture it. A small band of humans gathered around a fire beneath the stars. One of them scratches a line in the dirt. Another hums a sound, a pattern. The rest listen. For them, this may have been the beginning of myth, of language, of art, and then perhaps the rains came. Perhaps the ice advanced. Perhaps disaster scattered them, erasing their traces. And what might have been the dawn of culture vanished into silence. This is the haunting beauty of the prehistoric time gap. To know that countless generations lived, dreamed, and died within it, and yet we know almost nothing of their world. It is a silence filled not with nothing, but with possibility. The first skulls unearthed from this age bear both familiar and alien features: heavy brows, strong jaws, deep, shadowed eye sockets. To us, they may look primitive, but the shape of the brain case hints at capacity. The spark of intelligence is there, just beneath the surface. These were not beasts of instinct alone, they were beings on the threshold of thought. And holding that skull in your hands today, you cannot help but wonder, what did they see when they looked at the stars? Did they feel wonder? Did they dream of things beyond their reach? This is where our story begins. At the edge of memory, on the border between survival and imagination. 1 million years ago, in a world that seems both distant and strangely familiar, humanity was already waiting to awaken. And yet, after those first hints of awareness, the silence deepened again. The traces vanish. The gap stretches on for hundreds of thousands of years. It is as if someone pressed pause on humanity's evolution, as if the fire dimmed before it could catch. What could explain this? What force held back the tide of culture, only to let it surge so suddenly later on? Some believe it was catastrophe, flood, fire, ice, events so vast that they not only shaped landscapes, but erased memory. Others believe it was simply time, that humanity had not yet reached the critical moment when imagination became necessity. But whatever the reason, the gap remains. It is here, in this silence, that we linger tonight, listening for voices that can no longer be heard, watching shadows move across ancient plains, breathing with the rhythm of people long gone, yet somehow still a part of us. Because the truth is this: humanity has always carried stories, even when they are unwritten, even when they are lost, even when all that remains is a skull in the dust or a tool shaped by hand. The silence of the prehistoric gap is not emptiness. It is an invitation, an echo, a reminder that we are not the first to wonder who we are or where we came from. And as you rest, sinking deeper into the rhythm of this tale, know that the silence is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning. In the next part, we will follow the faint trail of artifacts that break through the silence. We will move from skulls and bones to the earliest whispers of art, and watch as humanity takes its first steps toward memory, toward ritual, toward becoming who we are. But for now, let the prehistoric time gap wrap around you like a blanket. Let the fire of imagination smolder quietly in the distance, and let the unanswered questions drift with you into sleep. Because sometimes the mysteries left unsolved are the ones that stay with us the longest. There are missing pages in the story of humanity, entire chapters that were never written down, never preserved, and never remembered. When we look back at the history of our species, there are places where the trail simply disappears, as though time itself conspired to cover its own tracks. One of the greatest of these mysteries is what we call the prehistoric time gap, a span of hundreds of thousands of years where our ancestors lived, struggled, and endured, yet left almost nothing behind to tell us who they were. As you close your eyes and let the rhythm of this story settle in, imagine yourself moving backwards through time. Past the years of kings and empires, past the first cities, past agriculture and farming, past even the caves where early humans painted animals on the walls. We drift further, slipping into the depths of time, until the world grows strange and unfamiliar. The earth is colder, the air is sharper, the land is wild and untamed. Great beasts roam freely across open plains, towering mammoths grazing in herds, saber-toothed cats prowling in silence, gigantic deer lifting their antlers like trees against the horizon. And somewhere among them walk small bands of human ancestors. Their bodies are strong, their tools simple, their eyes sharp. They carry spears hardened in fire, stones shaped into cutting edges. They live each day in balance with hunger and fear. And yet, behind those heavy brows and searching eyes, something else is waiting. Something more than survival. The seed of imagination. The beginning of story. We know that humans existed nearly 2 million years ago. We know they made tools, hunted together, and controlled fire. But what we don't see is the culture, the art, the belief, the things that make us human in a deeper sense. For almost 1 million years, the record is nearly silent. And then, suddenly, 40,000 years ago, a transformation. Caves explode with paintings. Bones are carved into shapes. Flutes are fashioned from bird wings. Rituals and burials appear, filled with meaning. It is as if humanity awoke from a long dream. As if, in a blink, we went from surviving to imagining. This leap is so sudden that archaeologists call it the cultural Big Bang. But when you step back and look closely, the story is not so simple. Here and there, scattered like faint stars in a dark sky, are earlier signs that the light was already flickering. A carved piece of ochre from South Africa, almost 100,000 years old, scratched with deliberate lines. A burial site in Atapuerca, Spain, where bones were carefully placed with respect more than 400,000 years ago. A fragment of shell from Indonesia, etched with patterns 500,000 years old. These are not the works of brutes or beasts. They are whispers of thought, of symbolism, of humanity stretching its mind outward long before the official awakening. And so the question deepens. Why does the record appear broken? Why do we see scattered sparks of culture so early, only to find silence stretching for thousands of generations? Some scientists believe the answer lies in preservation. They say early humans may have drawn on wood, scratched in dirt, or woven in grass, creations far too fragile to last through time. What we see today are only the rare traces that happen to survive. Others suggest catastrophe. The Earth has shifted violently many times. Floods, volcanic winters, sudden freezes. Perhaps each time humanity began to climb, disaster struck, erasing progress and memory. And there are those who whisper that maybe the story of humanity is not a single straight line, that there were branches and experiments, species of human who rose, created, and dreamed, only to vanish, leaving little behind but bones in the dust. Imagine this, a night nearly 1 million years ago. A small band of humans gathers around a fire. The flames crackle, shadows leap against stone. One of them hums a rhythm, another scratches a line into bone. The rest listen, their eyes reflecting the glow. In this moment, perhaps art is born, perhaps story is born. And then, just as suddenly, it vanishes. The rains come, the ice grows, the group scatters. Their traces are washed away, their creations lost. What might have been the dawn of culture disappears into silence. For centuries afterward, there is nothing but tools and bones, the bare minimum of survival. The dream is gone, hidden somewhere in the dark gap of time. The skulls of this age tell us part of the story. Heavy brows, strong jaws, deep, shadowed eyes. To modern eyes, they seem primitive, but the brain inside those skulls was growing, shaping, adapting. It carried not just instinct, but possibility. It could see and feel, and maybe even imagine. Holding one of these skulls today, you can't help but ask, what did this being dream about? Did they feel fear beneath the stars? Did they wonder at the moon? Did they long for something more than food and fire? Science cannot yet answer these questions. But the silence of the record does not mean silence of the mind. Every bone, every tool, every trace we find suggests that beneath the surface, something was moving, preparing, waiting. This is the essence of the prehistoric time gap. Not emptiness, but uncertainty. Not absence, but possibility. A reminder that most of human history remains untold. As you drift into rest, picture the great sweep of this forgotten world. The wind moving across ancient plains, fires crackling under starry skies, generations upon generations of humans living, dying, surviving, their names forgotten, their voices gone, but their existence undeniable. The silence of their time is not a void. It is an echo, a faint reminder that we are not the first to ask who we are, or where we came from, and though the answers may be lost, the questions remain. In the next part of this story, we will follow the trail of evidence that begins to break through the silence. The scattered artifacts, the strange burials, the fragments of art that survived against all odds. We will search for the first undeniable proof that imagination had already taken root, long before history admits. But for now, let the mystery settle in your mind. Let the silence of the prehistoric gap wash over you. Let the fire of possibility smolder softly in the distance as you drift further into sleep. Because sometimes the chapters we cannot read are the ones that stay with us the longest. The strange quietness of prehistory, the long and unsettling silence in the archaeological record, is one of the most haunting puzzles we face when we look back at the story of our species. It is almost as though, for hundreds of thousands of years, humanity walked across the earth without leaving behind the echoes of its presence. This time gap is not merely a missing piece in a puzzle. It is an immense void, a gulf in history that whispers of forgotten lives, lost voices, and an entire age of experience that we may never fully recover. Archaeologists sift through the dirt, uncovering fragments of bone and stone, and yet in these deep layers there are entire stretches of time where nothing seems to happen. No new tools, no carvings, no evidence of shelter, no dramatic signs of innovation, just an almost unbroken continuity of survival. Silent, invisible, and easily overlooked. When we pause to imagine the people who lived within this forgotten silence, we must remember that they were not unlike us in their need to eat, to rest, to love, to protect their kin, to find warmth in the cold nights, and yet their stories have vanished almost completely, leaving us to wonder, why? The very idea of a prehistoric gap unsettles scholars because it challenges our confidence in the timeline we thought we understood. If our species, or our ancestors, were alive during these vast empty ages, what were they doing? Were they trapped in an endless cycle of repetition, crafting the same stone tools over and over without imagining new possibilities? Or did they create things fragile, things perishable, that time has simply erased? Consider, for example, the possibility of wood, leaves, and fibers. A spear of sharpened wood, a basket woven from reeds, or the strings of plant fibers twisted into rope would all have served as vital survival tools. But none of these would endure the cruelty of millennia. They would vanish into the soil, returning to the earth, leaving behind no trace. Perhaps the silence of the prehistoric record is not the silence of inactivity, but the silence of impermanence. The fragile voices of wood and fiber dissolved into the dust of ages. And yet, the gap still feels too wide, too heavy, to explain only with missing artifacts. We know that evolution did not simply stop. Brains were changing, bodies were adapting, and environments were shifting. Climate change swept across continents in great waves of ice and warmth. Each shift would have demanded creativity, demanded resilience, and still, the record speaks only in whispers. For long stretches, tools remain the same, campsites remain sparse, and artistic expression is absent. It is as though our ancestors were caught in a dream, half asleep, repeating themselves endlessly, waiting for something to awaken them. Perhaps that awakening came in the form of fire. Though evidence of controlled fire stretches back nearly 1,000,000 years, the mastery of it, the true reliable taming of flame, emerges later in scattered pockets. In the dark silence of prehistory, fire might have been the flickering miracle that kept small groups alive. Imagine, if you will, a family huddled close to the flames, surrounded by vast emptiness, the crackle of burning wood pushing back the terror of the night. In those moments, the silence was broken not by tools or carvings, but by the glow of firelight, by warmth, by the simple heartbeat of survival. And still, the archaeological gap persists. Scientists often call this period the long standstill, a stretch of time where humanity seems frozen. But the idea of a frozen humanity is deeply unsettling. We are creatures of change, of imagination, of restlessness. To believe that for hundreds of thousands of years nothing happened is to underestimate the human spirit. It may be that what happened was so subtle, so intimate, that it left no mark in stone. Perhaps what happened was the slow weaving of social bonds, the first fragile sparks of language, the gentle rhythms of storytelling by firelight. These things do not fossilize, they do not carve themselves into the earth. They live and die with breath, with memory, with the passing of generations. When we speak of a time gap, then, we must remember that it is not only a scientific puzzle, but also a human tragedy. It is the absence of laughter, of whispered fears, of lullabies, of songs. It is the vanishing of whole lives that slipped between the cracks of time. The silence we uncover in the dirt is not just a lack of objects. It is the silence of people who once walked, who once dreamed, who once looked at the stars and wondered. In this way, the gap in prehistory is almost like a mirror. It reflects back at us the fragility of memory. It reminds us that our own lives, too, are impermanent, that what we build today may vanish tomorrow if not carried forward. The prehistoric silence is not empty. It is filled with all the things we have forgotten. Some scholars have proposed that great catastrophes may explain this void. Shifts in climate, droughts, volcanic winters, all could have reduced populations to such low numbers that cultural progress faltered. Others imagine that small groups were simply too scattered, too fragile, to build lasting traditions. Survival consumed them entirely, leaving no energy for creativity. And yet, even within these harsh visions, there must have been moments of beauty. A father teaching a child to sharpen stone, a mother cradling her baby in a sling of woven grass, a group of hunters singing as they returned with food. These do not show up in the soil, but they are real. The mystery of the time gap is not just about what is missing, but also about what eventually appeared. For at some point, humanity awoke. The silence broke. Carvings appeared. Symbols emerged. Tools grew more complex. The rhythm of survival gave way to the rhythm of imagination. Something changed. Something began to burn inside the human spirit that would never go out again. This, then, is the haunting truth of the prehistoric time gap. It is the threshold before awakening. A silence before the storm of creativity. The long night before the dawn. To study it is to stand at the edge of an ancient dream, to listen for echoes in the quiet, and to wonder what stories we will never know. And as we close this chapter of the story, we are left with a simple but profound thought. Perhaps silence is not absence. Perhaps silence is waiting. Perhaps the prehistoric gap is not a wound in history, but a pause in a song, a breath before the music returns. For so long, the human journey had moved in near stillness. The tools had changed little, the rhythm of survival had been steady, and the voices of our ancestors had been carried away by the winds of time, leaving us with a haunting silence. But silence never lasts forever. There came a moment, sudden to us, but stretched across countless generations to them, when the quiet began to fracture. The prehistoric time gap began to close, and the traces of humanity's awakening appeared. It started, perhaps, not with a tool, but with a gesture, a mark on stone, a line scratched into the surface of a rock, meaningless at first, but repeated enough to become something more. Across the prehistoric world, faint and scattered, we find these first whispers of symbolism. They are not yet the grand cave paintings of Lascaux or the carved figurines of later ages. They are simple incisions, cross-hatched lines, spirals, dots. And yet, in their simplicity, they reveal something profound, the birth of thought made visible. The silence of prehistory had been a silence of invisibility. People lived, struggled, and dreamed, but they left behind little that we could hold in our hands. Now, for the first time, thought took a form that could endure beyond the body. A scratch on stone could outlast its maker. A carved bone could whisper a message across time. Humanity had begun to step out of silence and into memory. We cannot know what these marks meant. Perhaps they were the beginnings of counting. Perhaps they were charms against misfortune. Perhaps they were nothing more than idle play, the scratching of a child with a sharp tool. But regardless of their meaning, they represent a threshold. The world was no longer silent. The prehistoric gap was breaking apart. With this new capacity came other changes. Tools became more refined. Instead of rough flakes, we see carefully shaped blades, designed not just for survival, but for efficiency. Spear points, bone needles, scrapers, all crafted with intention. The hand that carved a spiral on stone was the same hand that shaped a tool to fit comfortably in the palm. A hand that was learning to see the world not only as it was, but as it could be. And with tools came firelight gatherings, and with gatherings came something even greater: story. Though we have no direct evidence, it is almost impossible to imagine that early humans sat silently around their flames. Words must have flowed, tales of the hunt, warnings of predators, dreams spoken aloud. The silence of the archaeological record may have persisted, but the silence of human voices had ended. This is one of the most haunting truths of the prehistoric gap. What we cannot see may still have been alive and vibrant. For even as the record remained thin, the minds of our ancestors were growing richer. Slowly, across thousands of years, they began to sing. From Africa to Eurasia, scattered clues show us the spread of this awakening. Small figurines carved from ivory, beads made from shells, the use of red ochre pigments smeared on stone and on skin. These are not tools of survival. They are tools of identity, tools of expression. They mark the birth of culture. Why, after so many millennia of silence, did this awakening occur? Some point to population growth. More people meant more contact, more ideas, more innovation. Others looked to climate shifts, which demanded creativity and adaptation. Some suggest that language itself blossomed in this era, unlocking the ability to pass knowledge across generations. Perhaps it was all of these, woven together in ways we may never fully untangle. But what is clear is that something extraordinary had changed. Humanity was no longer content to simply exist. We wanted to remember. We wanted to create. We wanted to speak across the boundaries of time. This awakening is visible not only in objects but in space itself. For the first time, humans began to shape their landscapes with intention. Hearths appear in patterns, suggesting communal living. Caves became sanctuaries, their walls transformed into canvases. Burials became more elaborate, with bodies carefully positioned, adorned with beads or painted with ochre. The dead were no longer discarded. They were honored. They were remembered. And this changes everything. Because to honor the dead is to recognize something eternal. It is to glimpse the possibility of spirit, of continuity, of something beyond survival. In this moment, the silence of prehistory truly shatters. Humanity has not only awakened to creativity, it has awakened to meaning. The prehistoric time gap, then, is not only a puzzle of absence, it is the dark soil from which this awakening grew. The silence may have been long, but perhaps it was necessary. Perhaps the mind needed time to prepare, to gather itself, to learn to survive before it could learn to dream. And once it dreamed, it never stopped. From the first scratches on stone to the grand visions painted deep within caves, humanity's journey was forever changed. No longer silent, we became storytellers. No longer invisible, we became creators. No longer lost in the gap, we stepped forward into history. The silence had broken. The song had begun. The silence had ended. Humanity, once nearly invisible in the deep past, was now beginning to leave behind marks so vivid, so powerful, that they would echo across tens of thousands of years. We often call this period the symbolic revolution, the moment when humans did not merely survive but began to imagine. And in this imagining they gave birth to art, to ritual, to the first true expressions of culture. Caves became the great cathedrals of prehistory. Within their dark chambers, illuminated only by flickering firelight, humans painted scenes of life and spirit. Horses with flowing manes galloped across walls. Bison clashed in eternal battles. Human hands pressed against stone, leaving prints that feel like signatures across time. These were not idle decorations. They were acts of memory, of power, of faith. Each image carved or painted was an attempt to seize the fleeting world and hold it still. For the first time we can sense what these people might have believed. The animals were not only prey, they were spirits, guides, forces woven into the fabric of existence. To paint them was to honor them, perhaps even to call upon their strength. The caves were not homes. They were sanctuaries. They were the places where silence turned into song, where darkness turned into vision. Alongside art came ritual. Graves became sacred spaces. We see burials where the dead are carefully arranged, their bodies dusted with red ochre, their graves adorned with beads or tools. In these acts, we glimpse the birth of something greater. The belief that death was not an ending, but a passage. The silence of prehistory had once swallowed lives whole. Now humanity refused to let go. We remembered. We honored. We dreamed of what lay beyond. This was no longer survival alone. It was meaning. The symbolic revolution was not confined to caves or graves. It spread into the very fabric of daily life. Shell beads strung into necklaces, bone carved into figurines, ochre ground into pigment, not only for walls but for bodies. The human body itself became a canvas, marked and decorated, transformed into a vessel of identity. To decorate the body is to declare, I am here, I am different, I am one of us. With identity came community. Groups grew larger, more connected, bound not just by blood, but by story, by ritual, by shared imagination. In these bonds, humanity found new strength. Ideas could be carried further. Traditions could be preserved. Knowledge could pass from one generation to the next, carried not in silence, but in song, in symbol, in ritual. And from this growing fire of culture came the courage to journey outward. Across continents, humanity began to spread. From Africa into Europe, into Asia, across great distances that seemed impossible to cross, small bands carried not just tools and fire, but culture itself. They carried art. They carried song. They carried memory. The silence of the gap was gone forever, replaced by a great wave of human expression. Yet this spread was not without struggle. The world was still harsh, filled with predators, with shifting climates, with the constant demand of survival. And alongside Homo sapiens, there were others, Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, and perhaps even more we have yet to discover. These cousins too left their marks, though fewer, quieter, harder to see. For a time, humanity shared the earth. And in that sharing there was both exchange and competition. We do not know exactly how these meetings unfolded. Did we battle? Did we trade? Did we share fire and story? Perhaps all of these. What we know is that, in the end, Homo sapiens endured. We carried forward not only our bodies, but our symbols, our rituals, our voices. Where others faded into silence, we became the storytellers of the earth. The symbolic revolution was more than art, more than ritual. It was the foundation of everything that would follow. In the space of imagination, humanity discovered a new kind of power, the power to see what was not yet real, to imagine tomorrow, to dream beyond the hunt, to create not only tools but possibilities. And so the prehistoric time gap closed. The silence that once haunted our story gave way to a chorus of voices. We had learned to dream, and in dreaming, we had remade the world. This revolution did not happen in a single moment. It unfolded slowly, across thousands of years, each generation adding a note to the song. But when we step back, the transformation is undeniable. Where once there was silence, there is now abundance. Where once there was invisibility, there is now memory etched into stone, painted across walls, buried with the dead. And so we arrive at the heart of the mystery. The time gap, the long silence of prehistory, was not an ending. It was a beginning. It was the quiet before the storm of imagination, the waiting before the fire, the stillness before the song. The silence is what lingers. It is the haunting absence in the soil, the long stretch of time when humanity lived, but left almost nothing behind. The prehistoric time gap is not simply a riddle for science. It is a reminder of how fragile memory can be. We look back and see a great chasm, an emptiness between beginnings and awakenings. And yet within that emptiness life was lived. Children were born. Fires were lit. Stories were whispered. Every heartbeat mattered, even if the earth has forgotten. For hundreds of thousands of years, people survived without monuments, without paintings, without carvings. And when we think of that, it humbles us. We often measure history by what remains, by stones, by bones, by paint on cave walls. But perhaps we measure wrongly. Perhaps the true story of humanity is not only in what we left behind, but in the living itself. The gap is a reminder that our ancestors were not silent at all. They simply spoke in ways that time could not hold. Still, the question remains, why did it last so long? Why, across such vast stretches, do we see so little? Some scientists say the populations were too small, too scattered, their lives consumed entirely by survival. Others argue that the tools of expression, wood, grass, skin, voice, were too fragile to endure. And others still imagine that culture itself came in bursts, that long silences were followed by sudden flames of creativity. The truth may be all of these, or something we have not yet dreamed of, but whatever the cause, the silence ended. From ochre-painted bodies to shells strung on necklaces, from the first carved symbols to the great painted caves, humanity broke the stillness. We began to leave echoes that could outlast us. And from that point onward, the story of our species became visible. And yet we cannot help but feel the weight of what was lost. Entire ages have vanished from our sight. Entire generations are gone without a trace. The silence is full of forgotten songs, of unrecorded words, of dreams that dissolved into dust. The prehistoric gap is not simply about what we cannot explain. It is about what we can never reclaim. Perhaps that is why it moves us so deeply, because in that silence, we see ourselves. We too will be forgotten someday. Our words, our songs, our struggles may fade. Even our monuments may crumble. And yet, like our ancestors, what will matter is not only what we leave behind, but how we lived, how we loved, how we dreamed. The prehistoric gap is a mirror. It shows us the fragility of history, the fleeting nature of memory, and the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. For even when the silence stretched across ages, humanity endured. Even when nothing remained, we kept moving, kept surviving, kept waiting for the dawn. And when the dawn came, it was radiant. From silence emerged song. From emptiness emerged meaning. From the forgotten gap emerged the first sparks of the world we know today. So as you drift into sleep, let the silence of prehistory wash over you. Let it remind you that even in stillness, life continues. Even in absence, meaning waits to be found. And that beyond every gap, every pause, every silence, there is always a new beginning. The prehistoric time gap no one can explain is not only a mystery of the past, it is a story of us all.